It's 8 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, and you're going to stand in front of 50 people in 1 hour and try to pick the 12 that'll vote for your client. You starting to feel the knots in your stomach? Welcome to the Rafe Foreman podcast, and this is our maiden voyage. And we're going to start talking about voir dire. And when I was thinking about what I want to talk to you about on the podcast, it came to me that I don't want to just be entertaining. I don't want to just fill up 20 or 30 minutes of your day. I really want to give you some nuggets and pearls of wisdom that you can take with you to utilize in your everyday life and in your practice of law. The reason I talk about the everyday life is because voir dire is really just having an encounter with another human being. So just imagine you're at the coffee shop and you're having a chat with the person in front of you or the person behind you or the person selling you the coffee. You're conducting a voir dire because what you're doing is you're having a conversation about what's really going on here. You know, maybe you're talking to the person in front of you about what is a caramelized latte. I don't even know what to say, but why do you order soy milk instead of real milk, and what's going on here? Because we're curious. And so one of the things that we need to be curious about is what's really going on here. It's 8 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, and you're going to stand in front of 50 people in 1 hour and try to pick the 12 that'll vote for your client. You starting to feel the knots in your stomach? Because I'm telling you, it's a daunting task. And when I talk to lawyers about why they lost this case or why they lost that case, I always say you just had the wrong jury. And they say, what are you talking about? You had the jury that didn't believe your story. You had the jury that didn't relate to your story. You had the jury that didn't connect to your story. You might not have the wrong story. Maybe you had the right story. You just had the wrong listeners. And so I want to teach you from my experience in 34 years of how to pick the correct listeners, how to pick the correct jurors, how to pick the people that will connect and relate to your story. And so I have in front of me my actual jury seating chart from my last trial. Now, I'm going to keep it confidential because even though we got a big verdict, we haven't collected it yet. We're still working on that. And also I don't want to divulge the privacy of the jurors, but I won't be mentioning their names, but I will refer to them by their juror number. And I would never do that in a real trial. Like, you don't talk to jurors like, juror number 1, what do you feel about that? I always say their name. So juror number 1, are you Mrs. Ramundo Smith? Yes, okay. Just making sure I had the right person, and then ask them the question, because we want to personalize it and not treat them just as a number. But what I want to focus on in the podcast originally in the maiden voyage is, what do you do with these 50 people? How do you get them to talk to you? How do you get them to open up? Let's say they open up and they say some stuff. So what? What's useful about it? How does it help me make my choice as to who to strike? Because I teach voir dire about 50 weeks a year at Stetson School of Law, and it's one of the required courses in the LLM and advocacy that they offer at Stetson. And it never ceases to amaze me how little emphasis lawyers put on voir dire and how it is the most important thing in the trial. Remember what I said? Every lawyer that loses their case had the wrong jury. They might not have had the wrong story, but they had the wrong listeners. So how do you pick the right ones? Well, first of all, we have to talk to them. And think about yourself. What makes you want to engage in a conversation? Somebody up here standing in front of you and talking down to you, kind of in a judgmental, harsh tone? No, of course not. What makes you want to talk to people or when you feel like their judgment is going to be suspended. In other words, they're not going to criticize you. They're not going to judge you. They're going to give you a fair chance to say however you feel and not shoot you down. And that comes from the circles of energy. The first circle energy, and Patsy Rodenberg taught this to me. The circles of energy, or the first circle, is very inward drawing energy. In other words, if somebody comes up to you and says, "You wouldn't want to go out on a date with me, would you?" You see how pathetic that energy is? Now, we need all three circles, don't get me wrong, but you can't persuade somebody from the first circle because it's pitiful. It sucks the energy out of the room. I call people in the first circle energy suckers, and you know who they are. You see them coming down the hall and you duck back in the bathroom and you just came out of the bathroom. That's just because you don't want to have an encounter with this person because they literally suck the energy out of the room. Third circle energy is where most lawyers live, and that's very outward, pushy, judgmental, condescending, manipulative energy. You know, when you ask a juror to give you a response and they give you one, and, well, let's go back to the coffee shop. You're talking to this person in front of you who wants soy milk. Do you think she or he is going to tell you why they use soy milk if you ask them, why in the hell do you pick soy milk? Do you see the judgment and criticism in that statement? You're not going to get the answer you're looking for, I promise you. So I don't know why people think that's the way to examine jurors, because it's very self-destructive. The only place that you can examine jurors effectively is to choose to stay in the second circle. And the second circle is an even exchange of energy. In other words, I accept exactly where you are, free of judgment, free of criticism, free of manipulation. I just want to understand, why do you pick soy milk over regular milk? Maybe I could learn something here. You see the difference? You're not begging. You're not criticizing or manipulating. You're just having an even one-on-one, judgment-free conversation. And that's what you got to do about voir dire. Well, you say, well, how do you get that to happen? It's not magic. The problem is you're so foreign to it, it seems like magic to you. But what is the sweetest sound to any human being on the planet Earth? The sound of their own name. So don't call them a number, because a number has no effect on them. But when you call Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Rosa Smith, or Mrs. Parks, Mrs. Rosa Parks, that leaves an impression. It opens up the channel for a communication to exist, a connection to exist, because you have personalized it. And I'm a big believer in that we make nearly all of our choices on a daily basis on the basis of one emotion, and that is familiarity. What's comfortable or familiar to us is what we choose. Someone knowing your name and getting it right is comfortable, so therefore they must be familiar. When somebody calls me Stanley, I don't even answer. I know they don't know who I am. I know they have no connection to me, and they may be a bill collector. So I just put up my walls. If you call me Ray or Rafe or Ralph, that's even worse. You can say the word safe, S-A-F-E, but you put an R in there instead of an S, and people can't pronounce it. Rafe, Ralph, Ray. I don't understand that. And that is the biggest turnoff of my life, because nobody can pronounce my name correctly. So I make a concerted effort to pronounce the names of these 50 people that are sitting in front of me correctly. And I ask them if I'm unsure, that I'll ask them for permission to give it a go, like Mrs. Quintanilla. Did I say that correctly? And she'll either say yes or no. And I try to listen very carefully so that I can say it right the second time. And why do I do that? Because it opens up a channel of a connection. And I need to be connected. All right, so I've already taught you that the sweetest sound to any person is the sound of their own name pronounced correctly. So how do you get them to talk? Well, am I learning anything about you if I'm talking about myself? No, I am not. And so the very first thing that I do in voir dire is I ask the jurors to stand up, introduce themselves one at a time, and literally tell me anything they want to tell me about themselves. Now, you lawyers will understand this jargon that I'm about to use, but I once had a trial where I got 38 cause strikes on that question alone. Introduce yourself and tell me who you are, or tell me what you would like for us to know about you. 38 cause strikes on that question right there. You say, well, how is that possible? You got to pay attention. You got to understand what they're saying to you despite what the words are oftentimes, because people hide behind words. But if you can touch in and tap into their emotion and their experience, you can understand where they're truly coming from despite the words that they're hiding behind. So you got these 50 people up here. What are they going to tell you when you say, please introduce yourself and tell me anything you want me to know about yourself? They'll tell you the damnedest things. I mean, I have never failed to be amazed by what they'll tell you with that one question. So why is that effective? You know, you hear a lot of speakers say, well, in voir dire, ask open-ended questions. And that's certainly an open-ended question, but that's not the magic behind it. That's not the reason that it works. You can ask open-ended questions all day long, and you may not get the answer that you're looking for, or you might not learn anything about the person you're interviewing. So what is it that makes this open-ended question work? Well, I learned this from a good friend of mine, Josh Carton, who says if the story's not about the listener, they won't listen. And so when you're asking them to introduce themselves, they are revealing a part of their story to you. How well you listen determines the value of the share. So let's look at juror number one. Juror number one on my jury has a big C written on his name, and that's because that's going to be a cause strike. Not by who? Well, it means if I put a C, I'm going to move for a cause strike on this person. If I put a C with a line under it, that means my opponent is probably going to move to strike this person for cause. But the reason I have already put a C is because I can tell from the very first introduction and introductory statements that this is a person whose life experience is going to cause him to vote for the other side, most likely. And I'll give you an example. We're here on a discrimination case, and let's just say, let's talk about race discrimination. If the first thing that the juror number one says, hi, I'm Bill Smith, what do you do? And, you know, he tells you that he's a manager in a business, and the bane of his existence at people that play the race card and try to act like that they're treated differently because of their race. Are you listening to what he said? Do you think I'm going to try to talk him out of that opinion, or thank him for honestly sharing that opinion? Remember, stay in the second circle. It's not my job to be critical of this juror. It's my job to encourage him to tell me all that he will about himself honestly. And let me tell you another tenet that I live by. If a person tells you honestly who they are without being cross-examined, you can believe them. I mean, I can cross-examine people and get them to admit stuff that they didn't really do, you know, get them in the rhythm. You shot Kennedy, yes. You shot Lincoln, yes. I mean, we know that's impossible, the same person, but you get them in the rhythm and they'll admit to it. So that's not what I'm talking about. When you invite a person into the second circle and promise them that it's a safe environment, free of judgment, free of criticism, free of manipulation, and they reveal something about themselves to you, you can believe it. So, for example, juror number 2 has a C in underline because juror number 2 was motivated by what juror number 1 just shared, and she shared that she had been a victim of race discriminations many times, probably most of her life, and that she thought it was despicable that people would judge you based on your race instead of your merits and your laurels. Now, wait a minute. We just got two people on the opposite end of the planet sitting right next to each other. And if you look at them, you can see what's happening. Juror number 2 is leaning away from juror number 1, and juror number 1 is leaning away from juror number 2 and looking down at the ground. Are you paying attention? Are you watching? Or are you thinking about what your next question is and reading your notes? You better be watching these people, because those are two people who are telling you by their body language, we're probably not going to work well together. And you need 12 people that are going to work as well as they can possibly work together to come to a solution and resolution called a verdict in your case. Now let's skip on down to number 5. Number 5's currently unemployed. Man, that sounds good to me, because a guy that's unemployed knows what it's like to suffer. But his wife is an HR director at a big company. Uh-oh, brakes on. Now, what does this guy feel? Does he adopt all of his wife's prejudices and biases, or does he live independently of his wife? Well, guess what? I think he has his own mind. I think he lives independently of his wife. And so how do I reveal that? Well, I just asked him the question after he told me all this. How are you going to go home and explain to your wife that you just voted for a $1.5 million verdict for the plaintiff who was claiming discrimination? You know what his answer was? That's a hard conversation to have. And I don't know how I would say it. Well, so you're feeling some outside pressure. And I hope it's not for me. I'm not trying to put any pressure on you. But if you get on this jury, that's exactly the thing that's going to happen. And is it going to affect your verdict and how you listen to the evidence in this case? No, I'll try not to let it. Well, you see, here's the way I feel about trying not to. If the plane that you're flying on and you're sitting down buckled in the middle class where I sit, and the pilot comes on and he says, "Welcome to Will Crash Airlines. We're going to do the best we can to not crash today." Are you feeling comfortable about your flight? How about if he says, "We'll try not to crash"? I'm not feeling so good about flying with this airlines. I ask him, "Can you assure me that you won't let that interfere with your judgment here today?" And he says he will. So I just made a contract with this guy. He tells me honestly, I'll try to set it aside. I tell him honestly, I believe you. And he was the first juror seated on our panel. Now you may say, well, you're crazy to take that guy. His wife's an HR director. Well, hold on. You haven't met the rest of the Nazi bastards that I got to get rid of. Of course, I put a question mark by him, but as it turns out, he was less risky than some of the other jurors, like number 3. And number 3 is where I'm going to finish this podcast. Juror number 3 won't look at me. He has his elbows on his knees and he's looking at the ground, and every question that, well, I've only asked one question. I mean, so far I've said, what's your name and what are you willing to tell me about? But this guy's physically disgusted with what's coming out of number 2's mouth. And so by the time we get to number 3, what's your name and what would you want to tell me about yourself? He says, I don't want to tell you anything. And you know what my name is because you have it on the sheet. And I want to know, why are you asking this question? Now, what's going on there? Does this guy trust me? Hell no. Does this guy want to be on this jury? Hell no. Is this guy in the third circle and he's very judgmental, condescending, and manipulative? Yes, he is. I don't really need to hear anything else from number 3. Number 3 has shown me honestly who he is and where he is, and it got worse throughout the voir dire. For example, I asked the question of, What are you really passionate about? And everybody in the whole 50 panel answered except number 3. He refused to answer because he thought it was a stupid question and he didn't have to answer it, and he couldn't understand why I was asking. So if I wouldn't tell him why I was asking the question, he wasn't going to answer. So when he asked me, "Why are you asking that question?" I said, "Because I genuinely want to know." He just said bullshit and he wouldn't answer. Well, why do I not want that guy on the jury? Well, number one, we're not connected. Number two, he's not buying what I'm selling. As a matter of fact, he's objecting to tell me your name and what do you want to tell me about yourself. I can't ask a more I can't ask a lighter question than that. And so in our next episode, we're going to talk about how you make decisions between two jurors that you feel like are equally bad. How do you resolve to keep one and let the other one go? I thank you for listening to our maiden voyage, and I hope I've whet your appetite, because we're going to talk about voir dire a lot. And our exploration is going to be always on my podcast, what's really going on here. So I'll ask you, what's really going on with juror number 3? Well, I can't say it better than the judge said when she let him go. He just really doesn't want to be here. I hope you'll want to be here and join us next time on the Rafe Foreman podcast, when we further explain and dive into the vagaries of the process of voir dire. Please join us every Tuesday and Thursday for new podcasts and new materials. And also, we hope you'll support us on Patreon, and we will have exclusive materials, lessons, teachings, and even videos coming soon. Good verdicts to all.